A figure stood over the now lifeless body of the male teenager. An open gash across the neck, a look of frozen terror embedded within the muscles of the face. The eyes forever open, the skin that normally covered them, crudely sheared off. A thick brush deep in the forest would keep the body obscured for some time. Being off the beaten trail, hikers wouldn't take notice. The sky is still a marine blue color in the early morning, just enough illumination to exit the woods without needing artificial light, avoiding being spotted easily. The figure knelt down, repositioning the combat knife in their hand, now holding it more like a scalpel than a weapon. They cut a crescent shape into the right cheek of the victim. They stood back up, looking over their work one last time. The sun had yet to rise, though its hiding spot behind the horizon was betrayed by the alto stratus clouds, glowing a bright orange. The medium-sized town of Iron Mercy, Illinois, was mostly awake, parents readying their kids for school, or getting themselves ready for their early morning jobs. Located on one of the many suburban streets was a 3-bedroom, 2-story house, which didn't stand out from the rest of the middle-class section of the town. Urban development planning and zoning laws made sure of that. This house, too, was stirring. Noah awoke, still drowsy as he often did, unmotivated to get out of bed. He looked over at his alarm clock, 5:59 a.m. It flipped to 6 as he looked at it, causing the alarm to sound, startling him. That bit of adrenaline now in his system ensured he wouldn't be able to get back to sleep. Not that he could anyways, as a knock on the door from his mom added to the jolt. He moaned out to her that he was, in fact, awake, barely. He knew he had about a half hour before the bus came to get him. Practically dragging himself out of bed, he trudged to his bedroom door, opening it to expose himself to the blinding light of the hallway. Once the searing pain was over, he made the stumbling journey to the bathroom, where he took care of his morning routines. The kitchen was filled with the sounds of sizzling bacon and cabinets opening and closing. At the table was Noah's dad, Grant, playing some game on his phone, already dressed in his factory attire. As the teen entered the kitchen, the two men greeted each other with the typical male grunts. Noah's mom, Elizabeth, was quick to lay out the food in front of him, knowing he had only around 10 minutes before the bus would arrive. "You look more out of it than usual," his mom said. Noah took a moment to respond, his mind still not operating at full capacity. "Weird dreams last night. I don't know," he responded. "Good thing it's Friday, then," his dad, Grant, chimed in. "We'll save the cycle repairs till later tomorrow. Don't need you half asleep with power tools." The three continued to eat their breakfast till the school bus arrived. Noah quickly gathered his backpack and got out the door. Once aboard, he found a seat near the back, put in his earbuds, and let the ride fade away. He subtly counted the turns in his head, 5 of them, then about a minute before the bus pulled up to the front of the school. He reveled in each one of the calm points between turns. when he didn't have to use his foot to press on the metal leg of the seat in front of him to counter the momentum shift that had on more than one occasion caused him to slide off the seat. Once at the main entrance, Noah basked in the last few seconds he had, letting all the other students in front of him pile out the exit. He felt the footsteps lessen, and the suspension of the bus bob up and down as the other kids stepped off. Once it was more cleared out, he stood up, joining the haphazard single-file line. Finally off the bus, Noah spotted his two friends, James and Ben, waiting in the front yard of the school for his arrival. They nodded at each other, meeting up at the door. The long journey to the lockers was, as usual, dull. They'd always thought high school would be like the movies, kids getting shoved into lockers, cheesy romances, and a school dance where the socially awkward kid gets a chance to shine. However, reality turned out much different. It was as plain as the lunch the school served. The only excitement was a few kids getting busted with marijuana in their lockers a few years back. The classes droned on as normal. It was only math and science that grabbed Noah's attention. While Ben preferred English, James was more into the physical side of things, being on the school's baseball league. During their shared gym class, the three congregated into their usual team for the day's exercises. While getting their stretches in, James spoke up.
So, you hear about the party on the 15th?
No. What party?
Ben asked.
The seniors are doing a bonfire or something outside of town, after school lets out.
Were we invited?
It's not exactly something you ask to go to. I think you just show up, you know?
I don't think he does know.
Yeah, none of us do. The only parties we have is on Xbox.
Doesn't even matter. Football team is probably going to be there. Don't really feel like having them fuck with me any more than they do.
Just think, man. One more week, we never have to put up with Danny or his bullshit again.
The other two gave sighs of relief and annoyance, each of them having been victims of their fellow student, Daniel Carver, who had given each of them more than enough verbal and physical memories to loathe each moment he was still there.
Haven't even seen him today, actually.
During classes, the students were restless. Normally, the faculty would chalk it up to end-of-the-year excitement, looking forward to the summer, and for the seniors like Noah and his friends, being freed into the real world. However, even though they were doing nothing but watching movies and playing games in each class for the last week, the teens still seemed to be unable to concentrate that well. Finally, 3 p.m. rolled up, letting class out. Noah got on the bus, while the other two made their relatively short walk back to their respective houses. Once back at his own, Noah got his shoes off, throwing them in the dedicated corner, and got upstairs, ready to unwind from the week of school. His teachers were graceful to them that weekend, not assigning any homework, allowing him to toss his backpack onto the floor and forget about it till Monday. Noah turned on his console, seeing that his friends were already online. Later that day, after his parents had gotten home from their respective jobs, they were sitting, watching TV, talking about their day. It was weird today. Grant started. A lot of the guys at the factory were on edge. Fight nearly broke out over some dropped parts. Was anyone hurt? Elizabeth asked. Grant shook his head. No, that's the thing. We drop stuff all the time. Even when they land on a foot, no one gets too bent out of shape. Just don't start any fights yourself. Don't need you getting fired, she retorted. By the way, don't forget about next weekend, with your mom. Elizabeth reminded him. She told me the doctors think she's doing better. Should be released on Friday. Doctor wants us to keep an eye on her for a few days. Right. Guess Noah will get the house to himself for the weekend. Grant concluded. Saturday came. After sleeping in till 12 p.m., Noah finally woke. The sounds of activity downstairs becoming loud enough, he knew he wouldn't be able to sleep anymore. His dad was already out in the driveway, working on the motorcycle in the cooler spring sunlight. Eventually, Noah came out to see the progress made on the bike. While Noah was no mechanic, he did know how to hold tools and retrieve them. For the next half hour, Noah simply observed the work his dad was doing, taking in the information. Grant was attempting to loosen a stubborn bolt, and with one last failed attempt, he signaled for Noah to come and give it a shot. As the teen tried to loosen it himself, giving his dad a second to recover from the strain, the wrench slipped from the bolt, launching it towards Grant. The claw side of the tool impacted his hand, leaving a good cut in his left palm. Noah freaked out for a second, apologizing quickly for his mistake. Grant held his hand in pain for a moment. There's a fair bit of blood. As Noah looked at it to see the damage he had done, his dad reached down for the wrench. In his mind, Grant had an uncharacteristically strong anger towards his son. Images flashed of him smacking the tool into Noah's head. For a split second, he considered doing it. However, saner logic prevailed. The thought left him before calmly telling Noah to go get him a Band-Aid. As his son went back inside, he reevaluated that anger. Why he even thought that way for a relatively simple injury. He had sustained worse in the past, but never getting that enraged. He attributed it to tiredness, the stress of that week of work. After this moment, the rest of the maintenance went smoothly. The cycle took a second to turn over, but eventually did, sputtering to life, the tailpipes making the pops common to this type of vehicle. Grant took it around the block first, making sure it was working fine, then let Noah go from one end of the street and back down. He had his regular license, but was not legal to drive a motorcycle yet. This was his dad's way of getting him practice in. In fact, Noah was better on the cycle than in a car. They figured it was his years of being limited to a bicycle that gave him his carryover skill. The neighbors grilling in their backyards, people going to the local ice cream shop, and the sounds of target practice happening some ways outside the town limits accented this calm Saturday evening. Unknown to most of the residents of Iron Mercy, local police weren't having the same peaceful day. Some ways outside town, a section of woods were being cordoned off. Body of a male teen had been found in the tall weeds. A hiker's dog had gotten off leash, led the owner on a chase straight to it. Dozens of officers were combing the area, looking for more potential evidence surrounding the body. During the search, a person who was not normally a part of the Iron Mercy Police Department slipped in. The blonde-haired man looked around at the controlled chaos of the scene, and then turned his head upwards, seeing the cirrus clouds overhead. It was his way of tuning out the mess around him. He snapped on some latex gloves and approached the body. With delicate hands, he looked over the corpse.
Nasty stuff.
One of the crime scene photographers said.
Always hated getting pictures out in places like these.
Yeah, you never know what blade of grass you didn't look behind, he replied to the photographer. The man stood back up, his initial investigation completed. He looked around again until he spotted an officer that seemed to be unsure of his duties. Once he approached the cop, he introduced himself. Special Agent Elliot Miles. what can you tell me about this scene? He said, catching the officer off balance for a second.
A local hiker called into our department about 2 hours ago. He reported the body over there. Officer Connor Bailey, by the way.
Good to know you, Miles said, shaking his hand. He looked around again, observing the scene some more. Since you don't seem to really have an assignment, how about you work with me?
I'm just a street cop.
Don't worry, I can get you cleared, Miles assured him, pulling out a fold of leather from his pocket, walking off over to one of the higher-ups. Bailey watched as this man presented a badge to the sergeant, pointed over to him, and saw a nod of approval by his boss. Miles returned to the officer. You're with me till this is all over, he said before signaling him closer to the body.
So, are you new to the precinct?
Not quite. They called me in for this one. Connor trudged through the grass, trying to keep up with Miles' surprising speed. He seemed to move through the terrain without hesitation.
You said you're a special agent. What's so special about this case?
Miles stopped, suddenly, the officer realizing they were already right next to the corpse. Come here, he said, while squatting back down. Tell me what you see. Officer Bailey looked over the body, his eyes darting from one area to the other, trying to spot something, anything. Realizing the area was clean, he then quickly searched the next square inch. Even though he had no idea who this agent was, he seemed to have an experience to him that Connor felt somewhat intimidated by, wanting to try and keep up with him. Finally, he relented.
I don't see anything. I mean, other than the obvious.
Well, of course you have the slash on the neck, plain as day how he was killed. But that... Miles pointed to the left cheek on the boy's face. A 1-inch long cut in the shape of a crescent. That would be a calling card.
I mean, it looks like a normal cut to me. Besides, what about the missing eyelids? That seems more important.
Well, under a normal situation, you'd be right. It would be just a cut. The eyes would be a greater tell. Miles confirmed Bailey's initial assumptions. However, look at how relatively clean the rest of the body is, save for the head and neck. Everything after the throat cut was an artistic choice. So why leave a small cut on the cheek when you're going to cut off the eyelids too? Bailey looked over the body more, back to Miles. Call it jumping the gun, but I think we got a serial killer on our hands. The officer frowned at Miles, while a few of the surrounding police gave small glances towards the agent. Well, hold on now. We don't have any other victims at the moment. The sergeant interjected. Nothing like this anyways. Don't go chasing shadows just yet. Miles stood back up, prompting Bailey to do the same. Well, I hope I am wrong, Sergeant. Hopefully this is an isolated incident.
We won't know unless more bodies show up, right?
Miles and the sergeant looked back at him. That's unfortunately correct, Miles sighed, before signaling the officer to follow him back out of the woods. He paused after walking a few feet, turning to address the sergeant one last time. One last thing, Sergeant. Not to step on your authority, but I suggest a curfew, and you lock down this trail for a while. Just an idea. Sergeant nodded. Miles led Bailey out of the woods, back to his vehicle.
That doesn't look like a police cruiser.
That's because it isn't. They don't call me a special agent for no reason. They entered the vehicle.
So, where are you from?
A little ways south of here. Got a few friends in this area. Called me in when they realized it probably wasn't just some random murder. With that, Miles sped off down the road, headed for town. Sunday progressed, as it usually did. Most of the town attended their morning church services. There was a noticeable tone change. The pastor seemed to be a little less energetic that day. People didn't hang around the building to chat with each other as much. During the drive back, Elizabeth made a comment to Grant that the pastor seemed tired today. Grant remarked that he probably needs a vacation. A lot of people lately seemed like they needed one. Agent Miles was driving around that day. Bailey was off duty back at home. Miles was getting a feel for the town, pulling into a local restaurant, watching the parking lot, seeing how the people were interacting with each other. Finally, he went into the establishment, hunger finally getting the better of him. It was a smaller place, heavily ingrained with the local culture of the town. Pictures hung on the walls of various events that they had helped to fund, celebrities both big and small that had stopped in. Miles found an empty booth and taking it for himself. After a minute or so, a waitress approached him. "New in town? Haven't seen your face before," she noted. Just an assignment from my agency," he responded. "Oh, really? Some kind of important businessman?" The waitress toyed with him. Miles looked around a bit. "CIA, actually. Trying to uncover a communist splinter cell. Know anything about that?" He smirked at her, playing along with her sarcasm. While she was taking down his order, a nearby group whistled to her.
We've been waiting 5 minutes to get our order in. What gives?
They rudely blurted out. She rolled her eyes to Miles before turning around, informing them that she'll be right with them. This response wasn't good enough for them. The group began berating her even more, hoping it would prompt her to service them at that moment. Miles sighed. "Listen, I'm sure you won't starve if she takes another minute." The man at the table, being the loudest, responded.
You calling me fat?
"No, not at all. Just pointing out you got calories to spare." Miles shot back, the waitress trying to stifle a smirk. They threw up the finger at Miles, going back to their conversations. "Sorry about that. People around here are usually a lot less rude," the waitress claimed. "Oh, that's all right. I've dealt with a whole lot worse than camo-obsessed pickup drivers," he joked with her, helping to alleviate her stress of the whole situation, though his statement was not untrue. His food came, to which he enjoyed it greatly, so much so he ordered more to go with him. Afterwards, he paid his bill, leaving a sizable tip for the waitress's troubles, which left her a bit shocked, wondering if he was actually telling the truth about his employment. Monday, school was back in session. However, rather than regular classes starting, there was a meeting in the auditorium. As the students were gathering into the room, they were surprised by the police presence on stage.
Oh great, another drug talk. I bet Eric got caught with weed again.
The students eventually found all their seats and waited for whatever stiffly delivered PSA about drugs or violence was planned for that day. Noah figured the police were there to try and scare them into being straight edge. So many years in prison, what it'll do to their families, how it'll be harder to find a job, usual scare tactics. The principal of the school finally took the podium.
I wish that this Monday morning could be different. However, a tragic event has transpired. One of your fellow students, Daniel Carver, was found dead outside of town Saturday afternoon.
The entire auditorium was filled with chatter. Noah and the other two looked at each other, awestruck by this news. One of the female students, Daniel's girlfriend, Brooke, tried to hold in her reaction to this news. The principal continued, knowing the question on everyone's mind.
The police believe this is a murder case. However, despite it being an ongoing investigation, both our local police department and the parents of the victim believe it best to inform the school body.
A silence came over the students. Brooke couldn't handle the weight any longer, exiting the room in a hurry, one of the teachers leaving with her.
We debated letting out class early this year. However, the police believe it's best to have as many students as possible in one place for easier supervision. The police are enacting a curfew until the end of the month, longer if needed.
The principal finished before the sergeant took the podium. All after-school activities have been canceled for these last 5 days of classes. You will head directly for your buses. If you are picked up by your parents, their IDs will be checked. If you have previously walked home, you are now assigned to ride a bus. See your principal for which one you will take. He took a moment to look over the crowd. A head count will be done every morning and for each class. Unless called in by a parent, all absences will be reported and investigated. Agent Miles was present at the meeting, sitting with his current partner, Bailey, who took notice of the agent's wandering eye. He was quick to adopting this act, realizing what he was doing. After the sergeant finished, the students were subject to their first head count, then released to the rest of their classes. Needless to say, it was a strange day for everyone. Bailey caught up to Miles in the hallway.
Hey, I saw you scanning the crowd. Do you really think the culprit is a student?
Or a teacher. On one hand, it's more likely that an adult would be able to overpower a football player like Daniel. But on the other hand, to get him out in the woods like that, without him putting up a fight, might have been a familiar face. Someone his age. Notice anything? Connor thought for a moment.
Well, it might sound a bit stupid compared to what's going on.
Miles rolled his hand, motioning Connor to let it out.
Well, I noticed you're pretty much the only blonde-haired person in the town right now. Like I said, pretty stupid compared to what we're dealing with.
Stepping stones, Bailey. It's the small things that add up the most, he assured the rookie detective. You notice the difference in hair color one day, next you're going to see body language of killers. The two noticed that they were being watched by a student, Noah. Bailey took a breath, realizing that the kid might have heard their conversation. Miles focused on him, then went in for the approach. He held out a hand, looking for a handshake from the student. Special Agent Miles, how you doing? He stated to Noah with a firm shake of the hand. I'm good. Noah Casey, the boy said. Miles' eye twitched ever so slightly, unnoticed by the student. You wouldn't happen to have family in Colorado, would you? I don't think so. Right, never mind. So, what do you know about the people around here? Any theories?
Well, the guys on the sports team is getting a lot of fights, but they've never killed each other.
Let me ask you something, Noah. Have people seemed on edge lately? Noah furrowed his brow.
Like what?
Well, do people seem like they're quick on the trigger around here? Easy to anger?
Maybe a little. When we do basketball training during gym, some of the guys there get pissed off.
Noah caught himself. His parents didn't like him cussing, and he only did it around his friends at school.
They get mad really easy for simple things.
Miles silently took note of Noah's self-censoring. He was a smart kid, wanted to do right by his parents, but also wanted to do things his own way. If you had to guess who it was, what would you say? Bailey looked over at him. Noah was like a deer in headlights. That was a joke. Miles quickly calmed the moment. Sorry, this line of work, you get a weird sense of humor. Keeps you from going totally crazy. Miles shuffled in his left pocket, pulling out his wallet. Listen, Noah, if you or your parents see anything weird, anything at all, call that number. A direct line to my personal phone. Noah took the card before Miles prompted one last handshake before letting him go to class. The student halted for a second.
Sam might know what Danny was doing out there. They're friends.
Does Sam have a last name?
Asher, I think. Can you not tell him I said something to you?
Anonymous tips. They go a long way. Bailey stood with the agent for a minute, watching the rest of the students go about their schedule. Once again, observing the crowd for any clues. Noah caught up with his two friends.
What did the cops want with you?
James asked.
They were asking about who might have killed Danny.
You didn't tell them about the bonfire, did you?
They're probably going to catch the guy who did this before then, right? I didn't tell him.
No reason. The other two nodded before getting to class. Miles and Bailey got back into the car. Miles sat for a moment, mulling over things.
Why'd you ask if he had family in Colorado?
Connor spoke up. Worked as a detective over there, about 6 years ago. Name sounded familiar with a pretty interesting case.
What happened out there?
Miles stared off for a second, looking at the sky, noting the alto cumulus clouds. Flashes of trees, symbols, a tall figure, like an overactive slideshow in his mind. Nothing I want to let happen again, if I can help it. Bailey nodded, sympathizing with the agent, having seen his own share of tragedy on the job.
So, what's your story?
Oh boy, that's a long one. Been all over the country, transferred from one place to the other. Born and raised in Ohio, went to Texas to work the border, learned a whole lot of stuff off the old guard there. Made detective by 27.
That young?
What can I say? I learned fast. Also helps when you have connections that can pull some strings.
That's how the world works, right? Can't get anywhere unless you know someone.
You might find some connections too after this case.
So what made you turn in the badge? One bad case happens and you quit?
Elliot took a moment to respond. Certain aspects of it didn't quite sit right with me. I needed to keep looking, but the department wanted me to move on.
But you couldn't.
Elliot shook his head slightly, confirming it. Once his parents were home later that day, Noah had given them the news, as well as a few slips of paper regarding the curfew. They were dumbstruck by this. His mom was far more troubled than his dad, who decided it was time to teach Noah how to use his gun. Grant led Noah into the master bedroom and slid out a locked hard plastic case. He pulled the keys out from his pocket and searched for the right one. He unlocked the standard padlock he had put on it and opened it up. Sitting there on the foam padding was a .357 Magnum revolver. Chrome plating reflected the overhead light. His dad picked it up, unlatched the cylinder from the body, and checked the chambers. The gun was clear. He cycled the action, showing Noah how it worked, also showing him how to load the firearm. Since you aren't a kid anymore, I'm going to leave this case unlocked for the time being. Grant explained. When you get home, I want you to have this on you. Keep the gun in its case, but have it with you at all times till we get home at night." Noah nodded, feeling a sudden new responsibility on him. One that he was not opposed to. He had an appreciation for firearms, given the kind of games he played. He took the gun in his hand after his dad unloaded the cylinders. Noah felt the weight of it. It was heavier than expected. His hand wasn't fully capable of wrapping around it, not like his dad could. His dad reminded him to check the cylinders, which Noah felt was ridiculous since his dad had just checked it. Grant reminded him that it was good practice to get into. After checking, Noah worked the hammer, getting a feel for the tension, along with the trigger. He aimed down the sights towards the wall, noticing that his aim was shaky only after a few seconds of holding the gun at full extension. His dad told him to cock the hammer, to make the trigger pull easier, less time spent pulling it and potentially missing. Tuesday morning, Bailey met up with Miles outside of the local gas station. It had been 5 days since the murder, coroner putting Daniel's death on Thursday. 5 days without another body. The department was beginning to think it was an isolated case. Elliot was eating a candy bar, watching people come and go, when Connor pulled up. He gathered some effects from his car and got into the agent's vehicle.
Real cast of characters we got here,
Connor said with some morning sarcasm. Elliot was quiet for a moment, still eyeing the people using the gas station. 10 people. 10 people have gotten angry over the simplest of things. Dropping their keys, pump not taking their cards, forgetting to pop the gas cap.
How angry?
Just shy of property damage. The officer looked around at the people.
I imagine murder puts people on edge.
How many domestic calls have you been getting lately? Connor looked at him quizzically and began to recall the reports.
Not too many myself, but some of the other guys have gone to like 14 just in this month. Way more than we're used to. You think there's something bigger going on?
I'll let you in on something. I wasn't called here just for the murders. There's something else. Something I've been looking into for some time now.
So you're saying you've been monitoring the town. What are you, CIA?
No, not quite. My agency believes there are radical actors in the area. They might be trying to cause civil chaos.
So things got bad enough for you to come here yourself.
Exactly.
Wait. How would this group of yours even be causing an uptick in violence?
What my agency calls logic worms. Bailey gave him a confused look, which the agent was expecting. The short version. Audiovisual content that's designed to burrow into your mind, bypass the filter of reason, make you quick to anger.
What, like political stuff?
That's one of the easier ways of doing it, yes.
So, this agency of yours thinks this town is under attack by political videos?
Among other things, possibly. Elliot put the car into gear before driving off into town. Just like many cases before this, he wanted to check the local drug hotspots. That morning, in school, the news of Daniel's murder was still fresh in people's minds. There was a heavy atmosphere throughout the facility. Noah sat down in his English class. Usual chatter of students was noticeably absent. Given it was the last week of school, there was no real work being done. However, the teacher, Mr. Jackson, wanted to try something else. Once the class had finally taken their seats, the teacher spoke.
I want to do something different today. What happened to Mr. Carver? I'm sure many of you are confused, scared, and unsure of what's going on. So I thought we'd talk about things. I know I'm not the school counselor, but I think it might be good for us.
The room was silent for a moment before Mr. Jackson continued.
I know for myself, to have someone I've seen on a daily basis for the past year, to suddenly be taken away in such a manner. It's an odd situation, even for me. You never imagine things happening like this so close to home, to someone as young as he was.
One of the female students raised her hand.
How do we know if we're gonna be safe?
Mr. Jackson took a second, figuring out his response.
There is no guarantee in this life that you won't die in a manner that we deem pointless or random. I wish I could tell you exactly what you need to do to keep yourself safe. If I knew that answer, there would be no more murder, no more wars, no more need for self-defense. But that's not the world we live in, unfortunately.
The students were becoming engulfed by what he was saying, that he was talking to them on a higher level than what their regular curriculum dictated. Another student raised their hand, one of the male teens.
Are we, even able to defend ourselves?
Of course. Every single one of us, young like you, or old like me, is able to defend our own lives should we feel truly endangered. Not only can you defend yourself, but you can defend others around you. Community is not built on being suspicious of each other, but knowing that your neighbor has your back in a time of crisis, like we find ourselves in right now. Don't assume others guilty of crimes they have not yet.
At lunch, Noah sat with his friends. The true effects of Daniel's death could be gauged here, how each social class was dealing with it. The jocks and upper middle class students maintained a removed behavior. Whether it was a genuine disconnect from their fellow student or an attempt to disguise their anxieties was anyone's guess. Granted, Brooke, despite her appearance, was blatantly more affected. Students like Noah and his friends showed more effect from the death. They looked over their shoulders far more than before, no longer worried about a bully, but rather a murderer. The kids from lower financial rungs were far more jaded to the situation, some even voicing approval that the football player had died, retribution for some of his actions towards them. Even this early on, many students began avoiding the poorer kids. The paranoia that one of them was the culprit began to surface. Noah looked over at Brooke, seeing her in a numb state. He had been good friends with her in elementary school, even into middle, before they slowly drifted apart. Ben and James were making small talk while Noah sat quietly. He thought to all the good times he and Brooke had. Then the thought of Daniel crept in. Noah was never the subject of harassment by him to the degree others were, but the idea that she would fall for someone like him angered Noah. For a moment, he became angry, deciding that she deserved the heartache for abandoning him. However, what Mr. Jackson had said earlier that day reverberated in his mind. Anger made way for understanding. Noah finished his lunch, then threw away the trash left on his tray. After returning it to the kitchen staff, he made a last-second decision to make his way over to Brooke. Ben and James, wondering about his change of direction from their table. The table she was at had a few of her friends sitting near her, all making small talk. Noah's presence suddenly quieted them.
I didn't really know Danny that well.
Noah stumbled a bit.
But, it's terrible what happened, you know?
It was the best he could do. A small lie, given the harassment he had faced from Daniel. That wasn't necessary to talk about right then. Brooke was still in a numbness, but thanked him for his words. Noah stood for a second, hoping for a bit more, which didn't seem to be coming, prompting him to start walking away.
We knew each other in, like, elementary, right?
Brooke broke the silence. Noah suddenly stopped.
Yeah, we did. Middle school, too. Noah, right?
She asked. He nodded. Before she could say anything else, one of the other students across the cafeteria blurted out something. It was one of the lower status kids, yelling at James. Before a fight could break out, the aggressive student just shoved James aside and stormed out. Noah rushed over to see what happened.
I don't know, man. I just bumped into him. I said sorry. The guy's a psycho.
This only served to spur on the paranoia that the murderer was one of the lower class students. Miles and Bailey stopped at the local mall. It was just big enough to be a sort of community center, enough customers to get a sense of the townspeople. Bailey was pointing out various shops to Miles, naming off the owners, giving him a rundown on each of them. His attention, however, was focused on the man to his right, just a few feet away. At first, he seemed completely fine, till he slowed to a halt, just standing there. Miles slowly moved his hand to his waist. He lifted his shirt slightly and smoothly pulled out a box-like device. Without looking at the tech he was holding, he used his thumb to adjust a few sliders and knobs on it. Once he honed it in, suddenly it began to give off a whining, clicking noise. The digital display began to read out numbers. The noise was subtle as he turned it down. However, Bailey's attention was refocused to the device.
What's that?
"Follow me," Miles said, without answering the question. The man to his right began to walk forward again, the agent and cop on his trail. The man entered into a fast food shop. Miles and Bailey took a seat on a nearby bench.
What are we doing?
Elliot was silent, observing the man. He put the device on his leg and began to work the controls again. Bailey watched as the display showed what looked like a sine wave fluctuating across the screen, and a sort of radar-like graphic above it was narrowed down. He realized that the radar was being focused in front of Miles, towards the man they were following. The number readout to the right of the two graphics was at 0, then began to jump around. The same noise as before began to ring out quietly. It reminded the officer of a Geiger counter.
Is there something radioactive in there?
No, not ionizing radiation at least. Electromagnetic.
So, maybe they turned on a microwave or something?
I haven't used any of their equipment yet. On top of that, I've narrowed it down, specifically to filter out that kind of interference. The number on the device spiked suddenly. At first, Connor looked at it, startled by the sudden noise output of it, then realized it was reacting to whatever was going on in the restaurant. He looked at the man, who slammed his hand down on the counter, yelling at the cashier. Commotion made them unable to hear what he was saying. The number on the readout only grew larger, prompting Miles to bolt up, signaling Bailey to assist him. The man was growing more angry until Connor interrupted.
Is there a problem here?
He spoke, catching the man off guard. The cashier looked out from behind the man, seeing the uniformed cop, becoming relieved. The man turned around, ready to confront whoever it was challenging him. The readout on Miles' device stayed at the higher numbers, until the man saw who was behind him, causing him to suddenly change demeanor. Sine wave flatlined, as well as the number dropping down to 0. Situation was quickly de-escalated. Man left, rather than troubling the employees any further. Miles reattached the device back to his waist and covered it with his coat. The two walked out of the restaurant, back into the bustling mall.
What was that? How did you know he was going to go off the rails like that?
The brain puts out electromagnetic signals, gammas, deltas, betas, alphas. Miles started as he lifted his coat, giving Connor a better look at the device. This thing here picks up on all of them. Bailey gave a quick look of bewilderment as they went back to checking out the area. Later that night, after Noah had returned home, he worked with his dad's revolver in his hands as he sat at his computer desk, popping out the cylinder, spinning it, pushing the bullets out, and putting them back in. Suddenly, notification on one of his internet tabs popped up, a Facebook alert. He switched over to it, seeing the bell icon showing a new notification. He clicked on it, Brooke's profile having sent him a friend request. A small amount of disbelief struck him before he came to his senses and accepted it. A few seconds after responding, he mulled over potentially messaging her first, unsure if it would make him seem too jumpy. Before he could decide, she beat him to the punch and sent a text first. He opened the messenger section. "Hey," was all she said, to which he responded in kind. The conversation started slow. Noah had 1,000 things on his mind, but he couldn't work up the courage to ask anything other than, "How you holding up?" He knew the answer, but it felt like the normal thing to say given her circumstances. She took a moment to start typing. It started out short, usual response from someone going through this kind of trauma, a general isolation. However, it was Noah asking her about what she had been doing since they last knew each other that began to get her out of her newly formed shell. He unknowingly took her mind off the issues she was dealing with, giving her a much-needed reprieve from the reality of her life at the moment. Noah eagerly awaited each response from her, finding out more about why they stopped hanging out in school. It turned out there was no great divider that caused them to fall away, just the natural course of life. Interest had changed, priorities shifted. Noah realized some of the resentment he held towards her was pointless. For several years now, he believed that she stopped hanging out with him due to her popularity status rising. Now talking with her, turned out their separation happened well before it, for reasons less than malicious. This revelation was strange for him to accept. So long feeling like she had left him in the dust for a social group he had no ties to. That night, it felt like he had made a small breakthrough. They reminisced about their younger years, filling in gaps in their memories. Eventually, the hour grew late, prompting them to get offline. Not before Noah told her that he'd be there to talk anytime she needed. Elliot sat at the desk in the hotel room he had rented out for a stay. His laptop sat on the cheap furniture. He began searching through records of Iron Mercy. At first, only the publicly available information. The town had a local newspaper, the Iron Telegraph. Thankfully, it had moved into the 21st century. It had archives of all of its publications dating back to 1927. He began scrolling through the more immediate past, looking for anything that stood out. The site didn't have a keyword function. Elliot opened up a different tab on his browser and typed a string of numbers into the address bar. Command screen opened up. He typed in Search Iron Telegraph tab for keywords and phrases. No history of violence, sudden outburst, mentally unstable, murder. The screen then automatically switched over to the Telegraph tab. Elliot watched as the screen flickered. Dozens of pages flashed by every second, every line of text being read by the machine. After a few minutes, it stopped. Several dozen results. He then typed into the command line to sort by year, starting with oldest. A trend immediately became clear. Almost no reports of violence or murder until around the 50s. Then clusters began showing up in the mid-60s. Then the early 70s. Elliot refined the search even more, keeping it sorted by year. He then restricted it to reports pertaining to high school-aged instances of violence. This reduced it down to one instance. 1976. Elliot began looking through the article. His posture changed as he was seeing things line up. He was now sat straight up, intently reading what was on screen. It was then that he went to the Iron Mercy Police Department webpage. Of course, there was no way to access any records from that end. Going back to the command line, Elliot requested a network break. The request was processed. Suddenly, he heard a commotion outside his room. Looking behind him, his pistol was on the bed. Elliot stood up, grabbing his badge first, placing his thumb on the fingerprint reader it had, and swapped the cover of it to a different agency. The digital display on it flickered, becoming nearly identical to a physical badge. He grabbed his gun, holding it in his right, while he opened the door with his left. He peeked out, seeing two men arguing with each other. From what he could gather, one was angry at the other for taking too long at the vending machine.
Guys, it's 9 p.m. Handle the domestic violence in the morning.
The two men quickly snapped their heads to him, scowls on their faces.
How about you mind your own fucking business?
Elliot grew an annoyed look, raising his badge to where they could see it. From their distance, all they could see were large blue letters spelling out FBI. They both suddenly shared the same look as the agent, finally parting, leaving the hallway quiet again. Behind the door, Elliot clicked the safety switch on his firearm back to the on position and put his tools back on the bed. Over a vending machine? Elliot thought to himself. Whatever was happening in the town, he needed to figure it out. As he returned to his laptop, he saw the request had been approved, and the network was discreetly cracked, allowing him full access to police reports. He once again used the command tab to search for a specific keyword, this time a name, the one appearing on the 1976 newspaper. Sure enough, the same name appeared. Wednesday morning came. Connor once again met up with Elliot in a public place.
So you think it'll be easier once school lets out on Friday?
Not sure. On one hand, having all the kids in one place helps with safety. On the other hand, it's a good place to hide in plain sight. Then again, if they're at home and their parents are decently armed, might get the suspect's body sooner.
Unless they're out on the town with friends. Makes them more isolated, easier to pick off.
Miles nodded, agreeing with the officer's assessment. Who knows? It's been almost a week since this started. Culprit might be gone by now. The two were quiet for a moment, the details of the case running through their minds, trying to find any thread to pull. Miles was once again letting his mind drift in the sky, his eyes following the strands of the cirrus clouds above. Finally, Bailey spoke up, remembering something from earlier that day.
Hey, I don't know if you'd even care, but, at the precinct this morning, one of the guys in the locker room slipped on the floor. After he got back up, he beat the door on his locker, bloodied his knuckles.
Miles raised an eyebrow.
Wasn't even his first time slipping like that. We all have. Most of the time we just laugh it off.
What happened after he punched the locker?
I asked him what he was doing. It was like he just changed personalities on a dime. 1 second he was steaming mad, next he was fine.
Miles looked down at the dashboard of his car, thinking to himself.
It got me wondering. That one guy yesterday, the brainwaves and that logic stuff you were talking about, what if it's not just from online sources? What if it's real life? I mean, what if these radical actors you talked about are using some kind of, I don't know, some kind of broadcast signal to brainwash people? I know that sounds crazy, but, I mean, you seem to know about weird shit.
Miles maintained the silence for a moment longer. He was considering what to reveal to Bailey. Ever heard of directed energy weapons? Bailey only responded with a confused look. You know those microwave cannons used for crowd dispersal?
That's an energy weapon?
One of many types. You might not be wrong, though. It's speculated that these weapons could also be used to influence the mind, especially with electromagnetic fields. Connor sat there, a skeptical look, but also intrigued by what he was hearing. It might be possible that if you get a field strong enough, you can start to control how the neurons in the brain fire, controlling thought processes. Speculation ended, and Miles drove them off into town. His destination was a fast food joint. After pulling into the parking lot, Elliot handed his partner a card. Go get us something. Whatever you want. It's on the agency's dime.
Can't do drive-through?
Too early for me to interact with people right now. Plus, I slept like hell last night. Wild-ass dreams.
Looks like they're getting you with those energy weapons.
Honestly, with those satellites up there. Bailey's face went from a smirk to almost dead serious. That's a joke. At least for now. Bailey gave a breathy laugh as he exited the car. Miles watched his partner walk through the parking lot. He tapped on the touchscreen on his dashboard, bringing up the radio. He scanned through to try and find a station with music he could suffer, finally landing on something alternative. He leaned his head back on the rest, waiting for the food. He watched the massive cumulonimbus clouds in the distance. It always tripped him up just how large they were. As his mind wandered into the sky, something broke his peace. Radio, which was crystal clear just an instant before, was now crackling, hissing at him. The voice of the singer was drowned out by a garbled mess of static. Something formed out of the noise. It almost seemed to have coherence to it. In an instant, the radio returned to normal, as clear as it had been before. Just then, Bailey appeared next to the car, mildly startling Elliot. The officer opened the door, placing a few drinks in the cup holders, and grabbing the bag he placed on the roof. Bailey slipped into the car, settling back in while opening the paper sack. He looked over to Miles, who was frowning slightly at the digital screen on his dashboard.
What? Can't find a good song?
Miles didn't respond, only looking at the bag in Connor's lap, signaling that he wanted his share of the breakfast. At Iron Mercy High School, tensions were strained. Classism had reached a fever pitch. The near-poverty class students were targeted by everyone else. In just one day, instances of verbal and even physical harassment had increased. Most students were keeping their heads down, trying to survive the social strife till Friday. Noah was not a particularly popular kid. However, he was known among his friends and others around him for his level-headedness, enough that the students from upper financial rungs didn't bother him during this time of paranoia. His walk through the halls showed the more violent side of things. Friends of Daniel were accusing anyone they could of his murder. Those who pushed back were subject to beatings. Staff tried to dole out punishments, but given how close to the end of the school year it was, detention was all that was felt for most students. Only the worst offenders were suspended. Those feeling the violence were reaching their limits. Notably, many of the students from Mr. Jackson's morning class didn't participate in the violence, and few even tried to de-escalate tensions, though with varied results. Back in his English class, Mr. Jackson sat at his desk, looking out the window, watching the strands of clouds drift through the sky. He addressed his students again.
I'm not blind to what's happening out in the halls. My disappointment in the student body is deep, but I'm pleased that those in this hour of class have refrained from such behavior. It sickens me what I've heard from many students, thankfully not present here. Kids whispering in the halls, saying they're thankful for Mr. Carver's death. I won't ask any of you your opinion of Mr. Carver, but those of you who didn't hold him in high regard, let me ask you this. Do you believe his actions, whatever they might have been, were enough to warrant his death?
There was a silence in the room.
I hope you'll give this some thought.
Noah raised his hand.
Don't we have a right to be mad if he bullied us?
Yes, you do. But is your anger an appropriate reaction?
When are we allowed to get mad then?
You could come unglued right now if you wanted to. A situation like this is naturally going to bring out emotions for many. Others will shut off the outside world. Let yourself feel whatever emotions you need to, but what we're seeing in this school, the violence, this is not the right way.
At lunch, the tension was even worse. However, Noah had someone to help take his mind off of it. Brooke signaled for him to sit at her table. Her friends were slightly off-put by Noah, given that he wasn't from their normal social circle. However, Brooke was coming out of her numbness because of him, so they tolerated it. With no real leads, Miles decided it was time to pull on some strings Noah had given him. The two showed up at the high school, asked if they could discreetly have Samuel Asher come to the counselor's office. The faculty obliged, having the counselor himself approach Sam during class. Once in the office, Miles sat down across from him. I want to start by saying that you're not a suspect in Daniel's murder, but our information tells us you were friends with him. Is that right?
Yeah, I am.
Can you give us any insight as to how or why Daniel would have been in the woods on Thursday? Samuel was quiet for a moment, trying to think. His eyes began darting around the room, something which Miles picked up on immediately. Bailey took a few seconds longer to see it.
If, Danny was getting into, like, weed, I think. Maybe he went out there to get some from a dealer.
Samuel's hand was beginning to tremble as he spoke. Drugs becoming a problem around here?
Well, you know, a lot of the, like, poor guys around here do it. I think they sell it too.
Sam's prejudice was on display. So, Daniel goes out into the woods to score an eighth, let's say. Meets up with a dealer. Anyone around here have any ill will towards him? Sam's eyes began to redden, tears welling up. Miles spoke up before the student could answer. Give yourself a moment, and you can get back to class. You've given us enough to work with for now. Thank you. The two thanked the faculty for working with them and left. Once back in the car, Bailey chimed in.
His eyes were darting around. He's hiding something. Think he knows who?
He was fighting himself. He wanted to answer more, but it was like he was restraining what he was saying.
Why would he cover for his friend's killer?
Maybe he's afraid if he snitches, they'll come for him next. Maybe he's an accessory, doesn't want to be found out. The day was long. The heat and humidity didn't help the exhaustive nature of it. Miles drove out to a nearby field. The wind had finally kicked up, and he needed an unobstructed feel for it. He used the hood of his car as a seat, letting the breeze exhaust the heat through his more casual attire. Bailey took off his tactical vest, his sweat-stained shirt underneath now acting as a form of liquid cooling. They both enjoyed the wind, taking sips from the drinks they had gotten sometime prior to this break. Miles looked up at the clouds once again, now able to see them without the town getting in his view. Cirrus clouds, Elliot said, while staring at the white threads of moisture in the sky. Connor looked up, looking across the atmosphere.
Know your clouds?
Started noticing them more when I took this job.
What, things aren't interesting enough down here?
I like the philosophy of clouds. Connor shifted his gaze to the agent. Elliot took notice of this in his peripheral. An old partner of mine rubbed off on me, I guess, back in Colorado. He was a sarcastic bastard, but he knew how to look at a case in a different light. A few times it actually solved the situation before it turned into a murder.
So what's the idea of clouds?
Elliot drew his attention out to the fields. Doesn't matter what happens, no matter how many bodies you see, no matter how vile things get down here, they just keep rolling. World keeps spinning. Life goes on. The two were silent for some time, watching the wheat fields move in waves as the wind blew through them.
What if we don't find this guy? Like you said, he could be long gone by now.
Miles looked towards the road, taking note of the barely visible divider lines, the tar patches, the crumbling edges. Something tells me he's still around.
So a kid is dead, and you're just gonna trust your gut on this?
Wouldn't be the first time I went with it, Miles retorted. Flashes of a suit and a red tie flew through his mind. A child walking off into the woods, enveloped by branches. Never know where it'll take you. That night, Noah was once again talking with Brooke. They had continued their trip down memory lane, finally getting caught up to more modern times. Their conversation turned to their love lives, about who they had dated in school. She was surprised that Noah had more relationships than she assumed he would, though she didn't tell him that directly. Even after they parted, Brooke still noticed him around, always seeing a somewhat socially awkward geek. But knowing that he found his own way in life to be happy with, it made her feel less guilty about their separation. It was then that Brooke opened up a little more. She admitted that her and Daniel had begun to grow apart. His ambitions for a career in football seemed to include her less and less. He talked about the high life of being a famous player, almost as if she wasn't going to be in the picture with him. The relationship was not perfect, like they tried to maintain an atmosphere of. His death was still a major blow to her life. Noah voiced his apologies for the state of their relationship, but that once again, he was going to be there for her if she needed. He pushed it one step further, telling her that he was glad they started talking again. She reciprocated the notion. Noah leaned back from his computer, a sense of exhilaration at his reconnection with Brooke. He looked out the window, and at that moment, he noticed someone walking outside on the other side of the street. Given their height, they seemed to be a teenager, though exact details were obscured by a white hoodie. At first, he didn't give it a second thought. It was a normal sight-to-see activity outside, even at this hour. Noah then remembered the curfew. Since Monday, he had not seen anyone outside this late. Most likely some teen being rebellious and breaking the temporary law. But something about it just didn't seem right. Their body language was odd, as if they didn't know how they wanted to walk, nearly tripping over themselves. Even from that distance, he could see this figure twitching around. Noah watched as this person walked down the street and took a right turn at the end of the block. Normally, he didn't care about the near harmless, illegal activity of his age group, but given the circumstances, it didn't set right with him. Then he remembered the card. Noah grabbed his backpack, rifling through it, finally finding Agent Miles' card at the bottom. He pulled out his cell phone and typed in the number, rereading it multiple times to make sure he entered it correctly. It rang a few times before the line picked up. Agent Miles, who's this?
This is, Noah. I talked to you on Monday at school.
I remember. I take it this isn't just a friendly chat.
No, I saw someone walking down the street past my house. They were moving kinda weird.
Adult?
No, I think they were like my age or something. They were wearing a hoodie. It was white, I think.
Despite Noah's logic, given this was a real situation, not a simulation on his console, adrenaline was clouding his thought process. However, Miles knew this well. He guided the teen through the questions. Which way was this person headed? Street name and direction?
Fuller Street, I think. East?
Did you see any weapons on them?
I'm not sure. They had their hands in their pockets. Sorry.
It's all right. I can work with this. You're inside, right? Parents home?
Yeah, I'm in my room. Parents are watching TV, I think.
All right, obviously stay inside. But good work, Noah. Miles hung up, putting his car in gear and blasting down the road. He was several minutes out, knowing what kind of damage could be done in that amount of time. However, he didn't call for backup yet. He needed the stealth his unassuming car would have. He reached the area Noah told him the person was projected to head toward. There was no obvious signs. Miles stepped out of the car. He searched his surroundings, looking for anything that would give him a clue. The houses around him were all dark. Either no one was home, or they were in bed. It wasn't out of the question that this was a pointless lead. Minutes passed without anything jumping out to him. But then, an idea came to him. The figure wasn't going to commit a crime. They were fleeing from one. Hopping back in his car, he opened the screen on his dashboard. He put in a request for residential info. He watched the system calculate. The few seconds that it normally took now seemed to take minutes. Finally, the request was approved. Pulling up the map, he then tapped the microphone symbol. Residents with children attending Iron Mercy High School. Last name, Asher. There was one house, several blocks away. He threw the car into gear and screeched down the road. It took a few minutes, even at high speeds, to make it to the street. Pulling up to the house, Miles found the front door open. He grabbed his pistol and a flashlight, turned on his EM device, and rushed out of the car. The whole house was dark. He tried one of the lights, which didn't work. He cleared corner by corner. As he made his way to the dining room, the EM detector spiked. Prepared for attack, Miles jerked his flashlight in every direction he could. Nothing was there. At least, not in person. He noticed dark stains on the carpet. Shoe prints, heading toward the front door. Tracing them backwards, they led into the master bedroom. Miles slowly inched toward the open door. He swung with a wide berth around the corner, taking in everything he could, looking for anyone who might be ready to jump at him. His eyes would see something different. Two bodies on the large bed, a dozen feet from him. Even further to the left side of the room was a smaller body, slumped against the wall. A teenager. Miles moved forward, quickly checking the corners of the room nearest to him. It was devoid of threats. He walked up to the bed, looking at the two adults, male and female, their throats slashed. The calling card was on their faces as well. He turned to re-examine the teen, who, similarly, had a gaping cut in his throat, and the mark on his left cheek. To add to this gruesome scene, the teen's eyelids had been cut off, and his jaw lay open, his cheeks cut open, forcing smile-like wounds. The knife, which Miles assumed was responsible for this mess, was loosely gripped in the boy's hand. Miles stood, holstering his gun. He grabbed his portable radio and called for the necessary backup. "This is Agent Miles. I need ambulances at 21 November Street. Got 3 bodies here. Need extra units too. Place needs to be searched." His requests were confirmed. While he called in, his flashlight was pointed at the wall to his left. Near the teen's body, a red tint was cast around the room. Elliot turned to see what caused the color shift. The white drywall was covered in a mess of crimson. Specifically, a word was slathered on it, over and over. Smile. He took a few steps back from the teen's body to see the full scope of the message on the wall. His flashlight highlighted a portion of it. He read it to himself. Smile, 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 smile. What is this? As his eyes got to the end of one line, they darted down to the next. The S's seemed to be unevenly placed. Smile, 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 smile. The hushed blurring of the words revealed something that sent a chill down this veteran agent's spine. Smile, 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 smile. Miles. Miles. His EM detector tapped a few sounds out for a split second, then went silent again. The agent found the circuit breaker in the laundry room, flipping the switch back on, allowing the house to be lit back up. Flashing lights were seen in the distance. The whole place was searched top to bottom. There were no signs of a struggle, telling them that the adults were killed in their sleep. The discovery of the adults' licenses showed they were the parents of the assumed attacker. Bailey arrived on scene. His first stop was the room. Carpet drenched in blood. The wall written with the same fluid. Forensics snapping endless pictures. The copper scent finally struck him. It was the strongest variant he had ever smelled. He had dealt with injuries of his own and others in the past. But in his 2 years of being an officer, this was the worst scene he had ever witnessed. As he left the room, he took one last glance at the wall, reading the text. The snapping of the camera flashes highlighted the same disjointed spacing of the letters. Upstairs, Miles was investigating the room of the teen. As Bailey entered, the agent was sitting on the bed.
The killer knew the victim.
Bailey said, connecting the dots.
A familiar face. Gets him out in the middle of nowhere, kills him. No one suspects him of all people.
Worst part is, we're not done yet.
What are you talking about? He was our guy, right? He's dead.
Samuel and his parents had the same mark on their cheek as Daniel. He also had stab wounds in the back. Didn't see them until the paramedics moved him. Someone else entered the house while he was finger painting. Boot prints in the blood. None that matched the tread from any shoes in the house.
Okay, so there was another party involved. Who's to say they didn't kill the parents and the kid, then make it look like Sam did it himself?
Sam had connections to this. It's no coincidence this happens the same day we investigated him. There is something much more going on.
Just that gut feeling of yours?
Bailey said, criticizing the agent. Miles didn't respond. He only continued to think to himself. Bailey was getting tired of his partner's lack of explanations.
We better not be chasing a shadow,
Bailey remarked, leaving the room. However, he stopped himself.
How did you know something was happening here?
What?
This place. How'd you know there was a domestic situation? There was no call to dispatch about it.
An anonymous tip, directly. Miles half-heartedly said. Bailey left without another word. He went back downstairs, finding the sergeant. He approached him.
I need to use our system to look up Agent Miles.
What for?
He knows a lot more than he's letting on. He said his agency has had its eye on this town for a while. We need to know why.
The sergeant nodded. Thursday morning, using the systems there, Connor launched his personal investigation. His first area to look was the case in Colorado. He searched for newspaper articles from 2021. Turned out to be an easy find. Colorado child missing after 2 weeks. Local police department ends search. This is Detective Joseph Palmer. How can I help you?
This is Officer Connor Bailey from the Iron Mercy Police Department, Illinois. I just have a few questions pertaining to someone you worked with. Elliot Miles?
Illinois, huh? So that's where he ran off to.
What can you tell me about him?
What kind of trouble did he get himself in? Joey's sarcasm hadn't diminished, even after 6 years.
Well, actually I'm working with him on a case over here.
He's a detective there. He moves fast.
No, that's the thing. He doesn't work for us. Apparently he's some kind of agent. Hasn't told me for who yet.
Agent? I've got no clue. Last case I worked with him was 6 years ago. Missing person.
He told me about it. Well, he told me he worked in Colorado. I had to look it up myself.
That doesn't surprise me. There were some weird things that happened, not only with the missing person, but Ellie as well. Went off on his own one day. We get a call a few hours later about a man passed out on the side of the road. Dragged himself at least a mile through the woods, away from a previous crime scene.
What happened to him?
He wouldn't tell me. Though he claims he saw the person we were looking for, but couldn't get them back for some reason.
I got a weird question for you. Do you think he was in on it? That case of yours?
I've asked myself that a few times since it closed. He was definitely covering something up, but I can guarantee you he wasn't in on it. Ellie practically went off the deep end trying to figure it out. Hell, he left the force just so he could keep chasing it.
He's told me some weird ideas over here. Logic worms that make people overreact. Directed energy weapons. Maybe even some kind of cult or group trying to make people go crazy.
Ellie can be a bit eccentric. And also has a good head on his shoulders. What do you need from me?
If you can, send over what you have on that case. I need to know who he is, what kind of person I'm dealing with. Well, besides the issues we got going with our case.
I'll get him sent right away. And, listen, next time you see Ellie, tell him I said it's good to know he's still kicking. Also, Roxy says hi. And she's still mad at him for leaving. Within the hour, the case notes were sent over through fax. Not 30 seconds later, Connor got a text on his phone. Meet me at your place. Miles. Connor was confused. He never gave Miles his address. He took the documents from the printer, quietly slipped out of the precinct. He rushed home, now completely on edge about the person he was working with. The 15-minute drive back home was filled with anxiety. He was beginning to doubt who this man was. As he approached the street he lived on, Connor saw the agent's black vehicle parked on the other side of the road. Upon pulling into his driveway, Connor stepped out of the vehicle, looking for the agent. Nowhere in sight. He went up to his front door. Just as he was about to put the key in to unlock it, he had the suspicion that it already was. Placed his hand on it, then gave it a turn, to which it freely did. His eyes closed, confirmation that Miles was in his house. He opened the door slowly, and sure enough, the agent was sitting there in the living room. Connor was completely frozen, unsure of what to make of this. Miles broke the silence. Over the years of being a detective, and more recently an agent, I've learned that a breaking point will come, either in the case or the people working it. Given your investigation into my past, I figured the break is coming on our side of things. Connor pulled out his service pistol, aiming it straight at Miles, who simply looked at him.
How did you know about that? How did you know where I live?
Miles put his hand up, signaling the officer to stop. Got something to write on? Bailey frowned with confusion. Humor me. Bailey, keeping his sights on Miles, used his left hand to grab the notepad he kept in his vest. He tossed it to the agent. Miles began to write something down on the paper. Several seconds later, he flipped the pad around, which read, "Give me your phone." Bailey looked at Miles with a stern expression of denial. The agent once again raised his hand, letting Connor know he wasn't about to pull a weapon as well. He then slowly reached for his pocket, pulling out his own phone. Elliot began walking backwards into the kitchen, allowing Connor to keep his gun on him. Miles then opened the fridge and placed his phone in it. He then signaled for Bailey to give him his phone as well. He hesitantly complied with the agent, swapping the pistol into his left, pulled out his phone with his right, handing it to Miles. Once in the fridge, Miles closed the door and had them walk back over to the living room. "Let's go to the basement," Elliot said in a hushed tone. Despite Connor having his gun drawn on him, Miles was controlling the situation, dictating where they went and what they did. Once in the basement, Miles spoke again. "Any kind of devices down here connected to the internet? Computers, laptops, phones, TVs?"
No, nothing.
"Good. We can talk then. We have systems in place, systems that monitor all kinds of things, especially information pertaining to agents and who's accessing them."
Enough of the cloak and dagger shit. Who the fuck do you work for?
Bailey was fed up with the runaround.
That thing you were using Tuesday? The shit with the brainwaves? I looked into it. There's nothing on the market that can do that, not without wires hooked up to your head. So who is it? CIA? FBI? NSA?
None of the above. I can't tell you who I work for specifically, but I can tell you I'm here for the same reason you are. The good of the community. And not just this one.
Bullshit. The message on the wall last night. It wasn't just the word smile, it was your name. Why would they name you specifically?
Let me ask you this. Why haven't you shot me yet? I've given you the runaround. I've thrown strange ideas at you. Used tech that shouldn't exist yet. You still keep following. Why?
Because explaining a dead body in my basement isn't exactly easy.
No, there's something else. Say it. Bailey finally relented, lowering his gun.
Because this town has never dealt with something like this. You're the only one who's got any kind of ideas. Tuesday, that guy in the restaurant, you knew he was going to have a reaction. I guess I'm following my gut.
The brain is a finely tuned machine, one that can pick up on the smallest details and know something is off. Tell me, what do you think this is? What's happening in this town?
If you're right about a two-killer theory, what if we're dealing with a cult? Maybe Daniel was an initiation kill for Sam. Then he starts to regret it, so one of the other members kills him to keep him silent. But that doesn't explain why Sam would kill his own parents if he is the killer in this situation.
The idea crossed my mind. I looked into the mark left on the victims. Closest religion it even remotely lines up with is paganism. Crescent moon was the only symbol that comes close. Nothing else here indicates that's what the killer subscribes to. Hell, I even looked up the cycles of the moon this month. We're closer to a full one than a crescent moon.
Talk screen came in on Daniel this morning. Nothing in his system, nothing the coroner could detect. We didn't find anything in Sam's room either, so if religion and drugs aren't involved, then what's the connecting factor?
Miles thought to himself for a moment, deciding if now was the right time. I can't tell you every detail, but I can offer an idea I've had. It's going to sound a bit out there, but it's starting to make more sense to me.
We got 4 bodies, all with the same markings. They called you out in their message. At this point, I just want this shit figured out.
Shared psychosis. Ever heard of it?
Well, I've heard of psychosis. How is it shared? It's not exactly a contagious thing.
Similar to herd mentality, but for paranoia. It gets even stranger. I did some research on the town 2 days ago. 1976. Some kid, Jeffrey Woods, 14 years old, attends the same high school as our victims 50 years ago.
You're not gonna tell me it's some 60-year-old doing this, right?
No. This kid, Jeff, upper middle class family, upstanding Christians, entire family has no prior history of issues. Worst he was probably ever exposed to was John Wayne movies. I'm telling you, this kid grew up better than I did, and I'm milquetoast boring. Ohio tends to do that to you.
What? Life is too boring? Decides to lash out?
It's not just this kid. There was some info about some local bullies in the police report. Up until this Jeff kid moves into town, they're doing nothing but typical verbal harassment shit. Suddenly they upgrade to armed confrontation, knives, then guns a few days later.
What? How do you go from verbal harassment to potential felonies?
It was the 70s, so they thought it was reefer madness. Bailey continued his disbelief. Don't worry, it gets a lot worse. These bullies, they show up to a kid's birthday party, stick up the whole place. Shit gets wild. Parents don't even try to intervene. Fight breaks out between Jeff and the bullies. He ends up killing one of them with his bare hands.
You said he was 14?
Yeah, and after he beats one of them to death, another one lights him on fire.
Are you sure it wasn't actually drug use?
Even if it was marijuana, that won't cause a psychotic break. Not unless you have pre-existing issues, or it's laced. Even then. Besides, the kid was in the hospital for about 3 or 4 weeks, recovering from third-degree burns. Whatever drugs he might have been exposed to weren't a factor for the next part. Miles paused for a moment, pulling some pictures from his pocket. Cops are called a few days later by some neighbors. Parents and older brother are dead. Been that way for a few days. Can't find Jeff. What's more, the bodies have this on their faces. Tell me that isn't familiar. Miles pointed to a location on the image he was holding up.
Crescent.
Bailey said, goosebumps forming on his arms. A later police report details a break-in a short time after the Woods family was murdered. Some kid is nearly killed by the intruder. Describes the person as having large eyes and a massive smile. Sam's body, Daniel's body, eyelids removed, mouth cut in the shape of a smile.
I just want to make sure. You're not saying some 60-year-old is running around doing this, are you?
No. If the anonymous tip I got last night was correct, it's a teen. Bailey was silent for a moment, coming to realizations of his own.
The uptick in aggression around town, the 76 case, the way the adults reacted. I mean, could the shared psychosis cause that? Is it actually contagious? What if the emotionally vulnerable are more susceptible to it? I mean, it would explain why our suspects are teenagers.
I think you were right last night. We are chasing shadows, Miles said, impressed by Bailey's deductions. However, Elliot still wasn't letting on to everything he was thinking. The officer still wasn't ready for it yet. Before they went upstairs, Bailey stopped the agent.
Why'd you put our phones in the fridge?
Makes the signal worse, and helps block the microphones. I would say you never know who's listening, but... Word spread quickly, despite the recency of the death. Location of Daniel's murder had also become known. It was one of the many spots they would sneak out to, with alcohol stolen from their parents, throwing parties, getting drunk, the works. If the students in the high school were paranoid before, it was now reaching a fever pitch. The second to last day of school was a madhouse. Nearly a dozen students were in detention, at least the ones who only verbally harassed others, accusing them of being the killer. Other, more violent kids were kicked out a day early. Lower financial class students were being targeted far worse by others. Noah and his friends were committed to keeping their heads down. Miles was observing the school, looking for anyone who fit the description that Noah had given him the night before. However, trying to spot a white hoodie in a sea of hoodie-wearing teens was no better than searching for a needle in a pile of metal shavings. He noticed the aggravation among the student body, everyone looking over their shoulders, female students having their friends watch their backs as they gathered materials from their lockers, male students theorizing who killed Daniel and Sam. Suddenly, the EM device on Miles' waist sounded off. One of the students down the hall to his left blurted out a threat, resulting in shoving and quickly a fist being thrown. The device clicked faster and louder as the fight escalated. However, as the faculty intervened, the device went silent. What Bailey had said earlier that day, the psychosis, if that's what it was, could in fact be contagious. Miles quickly walked out of the school, back into his car. He pulled up the display on the dashboard. He tapped the microphone symbol. Requesting 50-mile radius dragnet censorship for town of Iron Mercy, Illinois. The request was processed. Text read on the screen. Justification. He looked up, his mind racing, trying to find something to focus on. Alto cumulus clouds hung in the sky. Miles spoke again. Possible cognition virus. Not even a microsecond passed before his request was approved. Keywords: killer, murder, high school, Daniel Carver, Samuel Asher, and list. List was confirmed. Any post on the internet within the town and the outlying areas pertaining to those subjects would be reviewed and discreetly hidden from the public when they were caught by the dragnet. Prior posts containing the keywords would also be detected. Whatever this thing was, if it was indeed contagious, wouldn't be spread on the internet if that was a vector of contamination in the first place. The agency took no chances. That night, Noah was up in his room, playing video games with his friends. Their usual chatter was much more reserved, despite the fact that they weren't close to the two students and even had mild hatred towards them due to some of the bullying they committed. The idea of them dying was a foreign thought. Something like this was only supposed to happen in big cities or other countries, in their minds. The fact that it was now a reality weighed on them, knowing how close it was. Noah's computer let out a notification sound. Checked his Facebook tab, and sure enough, there was a message from Brooke. "Hey," she said. Noah reciprocated the simple greeting. "You going to the bonfire tomorrow?" she asked. Noah paused for a moment, wondering why she was asking. However, he asked his own question. "That's still going on? Is that a good idea with what just happened?" "They're doing it as a tribute to them. Besides, I want you to come," Brooke said. Noah was dumbstruck for a moment. He wondered if that was why she was bringing it up. For her to confirm it was something else. "I'll be there," he said. Noah asked Ben and James if they were going, to which they denied. With everything that had happened, they had no desire to put themselves in such a dangerous position. Friday morning came. School was a half-day. There was a notable atmosphere of quiet anxiety. People were still on edge about the deaths of the 2 students. They were also eager to get out of school. The ones in the know were waiting to get to the bonfire, especially Noah. The clock hit 12 p.m. The final bell of the school year sounded out. Before Noah left his class, Mr. Jackson held them for a moment.
Given everything that's happened in these past few days, watch out for yourself and others now that you're done here. Not just for the summer, but now that you're going out into the rest of your lives. The world is a tough place. Give a helping hand where you can.
Miles and Bailey sat just down the street from the high school, watching the kids funnel into the buses for the last time that summer. For many, it was their final day in school. They both looked on, knowing their job just got harder. Something about that day, Miles had a weight on his mind, something pulling at him. The same feeling he got during the Colorado incident was pushing up through his psyche. He glanced at the sky. The clouds were Cyrus, smeared across the blue infinite. Back home, Noah immediately messaged Brooke about the party that night. "Is the bonfire still going on?" he asked. "Yeah, you're gonna be there, right?" Brooke replied. "Yeah, parents are gonna be out for the weekend later today," Noah informed her. As if on cue, he heard the front door open and shut. His parents had arrived home early, needing to prepare for the weekend away. While his mom packed, his dad came up to his room. "Well, we're out of here in a few minutes, but listen. With what's going on, I want you to keep the revolver with you at all times. Got it?" Grant said. Noah nodded. "I only want you to go outside during the day. Stay on the property. Keep the gun with you too. Just, not out in the open." He paused. "You're smart enough to stay out of trouble, right?" "Dumb enough to still get in it," Noah joked. His dad smirked. Soon enough, his parents were gone. Noah texted Ben and James. "You guys sure you're not going?" Ben responded back first.
And end up dead like those 2? Nah, have fun getting stabbed, dude.
Don't feel like dying tonight. Besides, I'm not in the mood to be a third wheel while you're hooking up with Brooke.
"We're just friends, man."
Uh-huh.
It was nearly 8 p.m. No doubt the party was already starting. Noah gathered some things in his backpack. He knew he would have to take the motorcycle, at least to the nearest area he could comfortably park it, to avoid prying eyes or reports from the neighbors, and the walk would be a longer one. He stuffed a few bottles of water, a jackknife, and, with some hesitation, his dad's revolver into his pack, then headed out. Miles and Bailey were sitting in the car on the outskirts of town. Sun was slowly dipping behind the horizon. Clouds overhead had a stark color contrast. Bright orange on their western side, faded blues and purple on the eastern.
Look, why don't we, call it a day? We've been up and down this town all week. Can't find a single thing. You think with a scene like Wednesday we'd have something? Prints, DNA. Hell, I'd settle for an eyewitness.
Suddenly, the agent's device began clicking, as if it was a Geiger counter in the heart of Chernobyl. Quickly turning both their heads towards it, Miles grabbed it, looking at the display. He frowned at it, understanding what it was telling him, but not fully believing it. Bailey looked around himself, trying to see if the device was picking up someone near them. Nothing. The streets were empty, not even nearby cars. Bailey was distracted by his own investigation. Miles watched the readout tell him a signal was coming overhead from the east. As it passed over them, Miles glanced out the window. He watched as one of the clouds ahead of them suddenly parted in a small area. Something unseen went through a portion of the cloud, hollowing out a tunnel in it. Strands of the cloud was carried west with whatever had just went through them. The device then rapidly quieted.
I think your brainwave thing's on the fritz. No one's here.
Miles holstered the device, thinking to himself for a moment. Finally, he spoke. How badly do you want to catch this guy?
Look, man, whatever illegal shit you're about to do, it won't go in my report.
What I'm about to show you is a few light years above your pay grade. The officer's heart rate quickened, unsure if he actually wanted to see what this agent was about to do. Miles tapped on the dashboard screen, bringing it to life. He once again pressed the microphone button. I need a high-priority network break. Local surveillance cluster. The screen flickered for a few seconds. Then, an electronic voice spoke out, stating there was an unregistered third party present. Bailey frowned, quickly realizing it was referring to him. Clearance code, Tango Echo Oscar, 7-3-1. Screen loaded for a second, then approved the request. The map screen was brought up, icons of every security camera in the town. Refined search, influx of vehicles heading out of town. He knew whatever he had just seen, what had set off the device. It coincided with events like Wednesday night and yesterday at the school. It was heading somewhere. The screen fluctuated, and a surveillance camera from the local bank showed up. Miles tapped on it. The screen then changed the camera footage. The timestamp showed a flow of cars heading west at 7:30 p.m. Bailey was awestruck by what he was seeing.
I thought you said you weren't an SA.
I'm not. Bailey felt a chill run down his spine, unsure of what to make of this level of technology, the ease at which it could break into systems.
Should I even ask how you can get into a closed circuit?
Computer systems are connected to the internet. Once you get into those,
Then you have access to the rest of the network. Well, if that bush wasn't in the way, we could see the front license plate.
Miles then pressed another button on screen. A grid pattern appeared on the footage. Bailey watched intently as the agent selected the left-hand portion of the screen, enlarging a window. He then reversed the footage, pausing it, then enlarging another portion of the window. Enhance image in highlighted area. Line by line, the image resolution increased, far beyond measures of the Iron Mercy Forensics Department, and their software was industry standard. Bailey finally saw what Miles had picked up on. The east window reflected the license plate from the back of a passing car. He quickly searched the owner of it, confirming it was a high school student driving it. Bingo.
How do you get that kind of quality off footage that bad?
Bailey asked, before his face shifted from curious to that of realization. Miles pulled up the map, finding what was westward out of town.
There's woods out that way. Deep woods. Oh, why didn't I think of that? A party in the woods. Every senior class goes out there to have a celebration.
Without any commands, the screen set a nearby public parking space as their destination.
Normally, the station looks the other way, lets them have a bit of fun, even though we know there's underage drinking.
There's going to be a lot worse than that, Miles said, shifting the car into gear.
Wait, no, hold on. We gotta call this in.
Wednesday night showed you the kind of damage that can be done. If we wait for backup...
And what if there's more than one person?
Look, I'm going out there right now. You can stay back and call for reinforcements, but I'd much rather have someone watching my back this time. Bailey paused for a moment.
Protect and serve,
he said, leaning back into his seat. It was already 8:20 p.m. The party was no doubt already underway. The RPM shot up to near redlining. Bailey was surprised by the car's unassuming appearance, being able to accelerate as fast as it did. The engine roared as the tires squealed against the cement of the parking lot they sat in. Miles hit a switch on his dashboard, activating emergency lights. While technically not legal, given that it wasn't a police cruiser, Bailey looked the other way, understanding the urgency which they were dealing with. Noah pulled into a parking lot near the entrance of the woods. From this distance, he couldn't see or hear anything from the bonfire. He had a flash of second thoughts. Maybe his parents would come back home for some reason, or maybe someone at the party would snitch on him. Brooke's message echoed through his mind, however, wanting him to be there. Noah brought the backpack around him, opening up the main pocket, feeling the water bottles, the knife, and the revolver at the bottom. He zipped the pocket closed again and began his trek. As his walk through the woods continued, it dawned on Noah how much danger he could be in. The killer could have been waiting around any tree, ready to strike. His head whipped around at every sound, branches falling, birds flying away, rodents scurrying around the ground. All of them took on a sinister feeling while he was isolated. After another mile of walking, Noah began to hear the sounds of the party ways off. For a moment, he paused, wondering if he should even be there. After all, the only reason he came was because of Brooke. Would she actually talk to him? Or would he be in the background while her attention was on her other friends? However, her message came to the forefront of his mind. She wanted him to be there. But in that moment, he considered that it might be a prank. When he showed up, he would be the center of ridicule. He brushed off the paranoia. Even if it was a setup, at least he would know for sure how he felt about her. With a last burst of momentum, he forced himself to walk the last distance. As the sky grew darker, the roaring fire served as a beacon for Noah to follow. The shadows of the trees dancing around the forest. Human shapes appeared all around him. This didn't help the idea that someone could be stalking him. But the noise of humanity nearby drove him to walk a bit faster, till he was nearly sprinting to get to the population of other teens. Just before exiting the tree line, Noah halted, catching his breath, calming his heart rate, not wanting to look like he was scared in front of everyone. Finally, he slipped into the commotion of loud music, dancing, and drinking, with only the light of the bonfire illuminating the area. Noah began scanning the crowd to find Brooke. Once he did, his stomach dropped slightly. She was near the jocks. This brought the paranoia back up, thinking that it was a setup. He considered for a moment leaving, avoiding the potential embarrassment. However, an idea sprang forth. He pulled out his phone, barely having any reception. He opened up his messenger app and texted her. "Hey, I'm here." He watched as she looked down at her phone, read the message, and looked back up, trying to spot him. "Where are you?" she responded. "Across from the trucks. Where are you?" He feigned ignorance. "I'm at the trucks, the red one," she said, confirming to him what he already knew. "Want me to come over?" he asked, hoping she would come to him. "Yeah," she responded. Noah, nervous about being around a group he wasn't familiar with, begrudgingly walked towards them. Within a few feet, Brooke finally saw Noah approach, giving him a small wave. As he approached, the other teens surrounding her looked at him. Minor scowls formed on their faces. Noah was taken by surprise when Brooke hugged him suddenly. He was stunned slightly by this action, but quickly reciprocated it. With that, the group begrudgingly tolerated him. Miles and Bailey pulled up to an empty parking lot, save for a motorcycle sitting there as well. The agent ran the plates, showing up as owned by Grant Casey, though he rightfully assumed Noah had used it to get there. "There should be more vehicles here."
There's an unmarked trail somewhere around here. We used it to get our trucks out there when I graduated.
"Well, my car isn't one for off-roading," Miles said, getting flashbacks of he and Joey finding a lumber mill. "Looks like we're doing it the old-fashioned way." The two men set off into the woods. Following Bailey's recollection, they rushed through the forest as quickly as their flashlights allowed them. Despite being in the middle of nowhere, Agent Miles' sensor began ticking. Bailey was far enough ahead that he didn't hear it. Miles paused, looking at his device. Suddenly, a branch some ways above him snapped. A pile of leaves rustled nearby. Sensor was reading something moving all over the place. Barely audible against the light breeze, a scream rang out, stopping Bailey in his tracks, as well as drawing the agent's attention in front of him. Despite the distance between the two men, as Bailey looked back to check on his partner, who he hadn't realized fell behind, Miles quickly made the expanse and rushed past him. The officer followed suit. Noah was leaned up against the truck. He and Brooke stood silently while the boys around them talked each other up about their feats during their games, reminiscing about their early days of high school, fantasizing about the future of their careers in football. One of them brought up Daniel and Sam, to which the others raised the beer cans in a toast. It didn't take them long to remember that Brooke was right there when they had mentioned Daniel. The boy sitting atop the truck cab weakly apologized to her. "It's okay. Noah's been helping me a lot," Brooke said, surprising Noah by getting him in on the conversation.
Already rebounding?
One of them joked, with a hint of accusation. Brooke didn't see the humor in it.
Kinda weird, dude.
Another jock said.
Her boyfriend just died and you're trying to make a move?
They all laughed at their own self-appointed cleverness. At that moment, Noah remembered all the ridicule throughout the years. While he was not the recipient of the worst end of it, there were still moments in his mind that struck him. Moments when they made him the butt of the joke in class, or diminished projects he had felt a sense of pride in. Hidden physical harm in gym class the teachers wrote off as part of the sport. Noah's hand felt the bottom of his backpack, shape of the revolver coming to mind. For a moment, sheer anger crept into his mind. The zipper to the main pocket was undone slightly, enough that he could easily reach in and finally get back at them. He played it out in his mind, forcefully drawing the gun from his pack, firing at the head of the teen sitting on top of the truck, then the one on the side, and the two sitting on the tailgate. Maybe he would even take out Brooke, since she was still hanging out with these people. It felt like he was a millimeter away from taking action. Just a final burst of motivation, and it would be done. The words of Mr. Jackson entered his mind. Do you believe his actions, whatever they may have been, were they enough to warrant his death? Noah thought to himself about this situation, about his history with these people. This was the last night he was going to see them in any meaningful capacity. After tonight, he had the rest of his life to enjoy, never having to put up with them again. With logic prevailing, Noah realized that he didn't care what happened to them that night, or any other to come. What mattered was his own freedom, from them, from the school he had to suffer through for 4 years. That idea, that tomorrow started the rest of his life, free to pursue whatever choices he wanted to make. It gave him a silent elation. Noah zipped up the pocket, denying that anger. He slung his backpack around his shoulder and gave them a cathartic send-off. Fuck yourselves. Brooke grabbed his hand, surprising him a bit. She walked away with him. As they reached the tree line, an ear-shattering scream sounded throughout the whole party. Everyone paused, looking around the area. It took a few seconds for the music to stop. Suddenly, 2 figures bolted towards the fire. 2 teens. There was a boy with blood running down his arm. The girl with him had streaks of crimson across her face. A surge of adrenaline hit Noah, and the whole scene became surreal. The killer was there. He was in the same place as the person who murdered 2 students. Noah zipped his backpack off his shoulders, quickly unzipping the main pocket, jerked the revolver out of the bottom, then grabbed Brooke's hand, pulling her with him. The two took off into the woods, back the way Noah had come. Yelling erupted from the party. Everyone was trying to figure out what was going on. The two sprinted through the woods as best as they could by moonlight. They were about 300 feet from the bonfire when they heard the sound of sticks and leaves rustling and breaking in front of them. Noah halted, using a tree to stop his momentum. 2 figures were rushing towards them. Noah raised the handgun, its chrome finish shining in the lunar glow. Seeing this, the figures slowed down. Once they came in close enough, light revealed it to be Agent Miles and Officer Bailey. The agent raised his hands, trying to calm the situation. It took him a second to recognize who was aiming the gun at him. "Noah?" Miles asked. The teen's face contorted, confused that he was recognized by these figures. "Noah, it's Agent Miles. I need you to put down the gun," he said, slightly out of breath from the sprint. The boy, with adrenaline surging through him, wasn't registering what was being said. "Listen, you two get out of here. Get back to your bike. You were never at this party. Got it?" Miles said, assuring Noah that he wasn't in trouble. He's here." Noah stammered out, slowly lowering the gun. Another scream rang out from the direction of the party, breaking him out of his stupor. "Get out of here, right now!" Miles commanded, letting the teens rush past them. The two men pulled out their own weapons, sprinting towards the party. It only took them a few seconds more to reach the tree line. The scene was chaos. Some were running towards the woods in a blind fear. Others were getting in their cars and leaving. Through the mess, the agent spotted the key element. One of the jocks was being attacked by a hooded figure. Miles raised his gun, taking aim. He paused. Despite having a steady and clear line of sight, despite having shot others before, he couldn't pull the trigger this time. He saw his previous failure to save a child from the unknown. He saw Preston in that moment. Bailey urged him to take the shot. Miles took a breath, holstered his pistol, and bolted forward. As lightning, he dashed through the open space. With one solid hit, Miles kicked the assailant off the other boy. A few snaps from the breaking ribs and the killer could be heard. After tumbling and struggling to get back up, ultimately unable to, the hooded teen could be heard wheezing, his left lung slightly punctured by one of the broken ribs. Bailey rushed up to the near murder scene. Miles looked the victim over, injured but not dead. "Call in a full squad, get some ambulances, meet them at the parking lot," Miles said, to which Bailey repeated into his radio. "I'll be right behind you." Bailey picked up the victim, getting the teen across his shoulders, then began a steady jog through the woods, back to the parking lot. As the officer disappeared into the tree line, Miles approached the hooded teen. First thing that struck him was the lack of eyelids, just like the previous 4 victims. Just as well, a bloody slit cut through the cheeks, simulating a permanent smile. The blinkless eyes of the teen tracked Miles as he approached him, wheezing, barely able to move. The agent pulled out his sensor device. The readout was off the charts. Suddenly turned to normal. The speaker on the device went from a ticking noise to static. A voice weakly coming through. Then it went completely silent. The teen, as well, seemed to lose consciousness. What was left of his eyelids closed. "So that's what you are," Miles said to himself. He picked up the near lifeless body of the teen, began his own trek through the woods. By the time he was nearly out of the forest, he could see the flashing lights of ambulances and police cars. The motorcycle was gone. Noah had gotten out with Brooke before the cops showed up. As Miles stumbled out of the woods, paramedics met him with a gurney. He laid the teen down on it, the EMTs being slightly taken aback by the face of the boy, but quickly strapped his body down. "Take a cop with you. He's aggressive." The medical team nodded. He watched as they loaded the patient into the back, performing some preliminary treatments. The vehicle took off as soon as the officer climbed in the back with the attending paramedic. He saw another medical team bandaging up one of the partygoers, his left shoulder cut. Next to them, a girl was holding his right hand.
"They got the other kid on his way to the hospital already,"
Bailey said, walking up to Miles.
"He's gonna make it. Few stitches for the gashes, but other than that..."
The agent stood there, zoning out of the scene, watching the flashing lights illuminating the surrounding trees. Shadows of the people present in the parking lot shifting in the dancing lights.
So, was he our guy?
Miles remained silent for another moment, looking at the shadows cast against the trees, imagining a smoke-like vapor flowing from one to the other. Yeah, he's our guy. Despite the tragedy of the past few days, with the apprehension of the killer, it was like the town was revitalized. Though the deaths of the 4 victims weighed heavy on those closest to them, there is a bittersweet comfort knowing that this psychopath would have no more victims. Questions still remain, though. Why they were compelled to murder these people, and how the 2 teens were connected in this. But many knew the answers might never come. Monday afternoon arrived. Bailey exited the precinct after finishing up his report, also receiving the good news of a month's paid vacation. He saw Miles sitting on the hood of his unassuming car.
Cumulonimbus,
Bailey said, pointing up, walking towards the agent. Miles shifted his gaze towards the sky.
That, philosophy of yours rubbed off on me a bit.
As Bailey came up to him, Miles reached into his pocket, pulling out his wallet. He grabbed a card from out of the folds, handing it to the officer. There were no identifying marks on it, just a phone number. If this ever happens again, or you're ready for something more, give that number a call.
Should I even try to ask who you work for?
You've heard of continuance of government, right?
Vaguely.
In the event of societal collapse, nuclear war, or any other major world-changing scenarios, it's a system to hopefully keep the US government running. My agency is similar. Continuance of normalcy. Well, normal according to them anyways. Bailey frowned, now fully unsure of what this man was talking about. We prefer to keep society running how it is. Well, we like to keep humanity in charge of how it runs. Anything that threatens that, we step in. Bailey, at first in disbelief of what he was hearing, instead chose to roll with it.
How's that going?
Some fights are easier than others.
Well, I'd say we won this fight, despite what last week brought. Like you said, clouds in the sky, rolling on like they always do.
To them, it's like none of it even happened.
So, what's next for you?
Got a lead over in Iowa, actually. Circus is in town. I got a magic show we're interested in.
What? The magician too good to believe?
Well, from what I'm told, he's amazing. Miles said, grinning, lifting himself off the hood, getting ready to leave.
Watch yourself out there. I don't know if I fully believe what you told me, but I do know there's some weird shit in this world.
He raised the card up.
So, how long is this offer good for?
Death, give or take, the agent said, slipping into the driver's seat of his car. Connor paused for a moment while Elliot rolled down his window.
This is the connection you were telling me about. The one I might get.
Agency is always scouting for people who can plunge into the unknown, not let it get the best of them.
And you think that's me? Some guy who didn't even know what he was supposed to be doing in a field with a dead body? The guy who pulled a gun on you?
And Friday night, you connected the dots I wouldn't have. You got the capacity for it. Just need to capitalize on it. That card, that's your ticket. Whenever you're ready. Miles said, putting his car in reverse.
Oh, by the way, The killer, Eric Forrest, he wasn't friends with Daniel or Sam. His home life wasn't great though, drugs and physical abuse, so the department is writing that off as a cause. He's been moved to the psych ward at the hospital. Apparently they're going for the insanity plea. Probably gonna get it too. I'm hearing that the kid is practically comatose. Doesn't respond to anyone.
Elliot gave Connor a small nod before backing out of the precinct parking lot. As the agent drove through the town, the hospital was on his way out. He decided to pay the killer a visit. He entered the facility, following the directions to the psychiatric wing. There was a badge scanner limiting access to hospital staff. Miles pulled out his badge, which housed a chameleon chip, capable of opening most locks that use frequency-based systems. This particular door was no different. The lock disengaged, allowing him to step inside. He passed by rooms, some empty, some not. It was the main rec room where he saw this point of interest. A male teen in a wheelchair, thick bandages wrapped around his head. Miles pulled out his sensor, curious about the readout. His brow furrowed. There was nothing on the display. He narrowed the band, adjusted the waves. But as far as the device was concerned, this person did not exist. The agent slowly approached Eric, noticing that his hands were moving, his head looking down towards his hands. Peering over his shoulder, Miles saw a notepad on his lap, a pen in hand. There were haphazard drawings covering the page, that of beady eyes and wicked grins. The faces of Daniel, Sam, the parents, and now Eric. The boy turned his head, slowly, contorting it to an awkward angle, looking up at the agent. The smile formed on his face, wide, pulling the stitches used to sew up his cheeks. Small drops of blood formed where the thread went into the skin. Though Eric's eyes were covered, Elliot felt something piercing through the bandages, staring back at him. A sudden tick of the sensor device, the same readout he got from last night. Then back to nothing. A chill ran up the agent's spine. An empty shell. No signs of the natural life that once inhabited this form. Only echoes of what the hijacker left behind. Miles put his device back on his belt and turned away, walking back through the psych ward, feeling the eyes of the entity still focused on him, behind those bandages. The agent returned to his car, tapping the dashboard screen. He pulled up the voice command. Agent Elliot Miles, clearance code 19-2-8, upheaval. Open subject files, new entry. Codename, Crescent Mark. Current date. Location, Iron Mercy, Illinois, United States. Hazard types, cognitive, spiritual, extra-dimensional. Description, widespread entity possession, causing uncharacteristically irrational and/or violent behavior in adult and teenage population, up to and including murder. Historical records suggest prior incident in 1970s. Threat remains active. Recommended response: slow burn exodus.
Take a seat.
So, what is this? Honestly, a weird place to hold an interview. Some broken down warehouse?
One of many forward operating bases. The less it looks like one, the better.
Who are you guys exactly? Miles said something about continuance of normalcy.
That's right. We are an agency dedicated to the continuance of human dominance of global affairs.
Seriously, are you guys CIA?
Not at all. Though we do use their resources when necessary.
You know, Miles gave me the runaround too.
Agents are only permitted to reveal a certain amount of information to the public. You were subject to more, given your potential recruitment.
So, are you going to tell me who you guys are? Or do I just get more of the same? Alright, fuck it. Do you deal with the paranormal?
Yes.
What was the case in Iron Mercy?
A rogue consciousness, capable of possession.
Possession? Like a demon?
Currently unknown. It's possible it is a spiritual entity.
Well, what else is there?
We cannot rule out non-physical, extraterrestrial beings. Extra-dimensional, even.
Why are you telling me this?
Because you asked.
And what if I decide not to go along with this agency? Are you guys gonna kill me?
No.
And if I decide to go public with this kind of information?
You can join the chorus of other internet stories no one believes.
Okay. What do you want from me?
Whatever you can give us.